Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Inside Exec. We have been talking most recently with Chris Clearfield, and during that conversation we touched on the subject that I have over the years talked about a number of times. We've had guests talk about it both in the industry and outside, and that's about getting qualifications. So it made me think back to one of the very early podcasts we had where we talked about that. In fact, we talked about, have I got the right qualifications? And that was back in 2016. Since then, obviously, the world has changed quite dramatically. So today, we're seeing increasing numbers of graduates entering the workforce, but fewer of them stepping straight into meaningful employment. And I think that Chris talked about the fact that the employment levels had gone down from 47% down to less than 12% in this last intake of recent graduates. So we're talking first job out of study time. So I think now that the question has evolved, it's not now about do I have the right qualifications. It really is about, are qualifications enough? Because if we just in a social sense, we think about if we had a coffee shop and we were employing someone who was a barista, we wouldn't automatically assume that because they've got the qualifications to use a particular machine or produce the coffee, that is the only thing that we would determine in employing them. And that we have to look at that decision-making process is now far more broadly accepted than just in the service industries. So back in 2016, we talked about qualifications as a mix of academic achievement, experience, and proven performance. And we made the point that qualifications in the broader sense meant that the total person, and that still holds true. What's changed is the weighting of those elements that we looked at all those years ago. So today, more people have degrees than ever before. Degrees have become, in many cases, a baseline expectation. And employers increasingly are saying, what else can you do apart from this qualification that puts you in the same bracket as everybody else? What else can you do? What else have you got? At the same time, the graduate employment rates, particularly the first 6 to 12 months after graduation, have softened in many sectors. So now we have this paradox: higher qualification levels, lower immediate employment outcomes. For someone entering the workforce today, qualifications are still important, but they're no longer the differentiator that they used to be even 10 years ago. They are the entry ticket, not the deciding factor. And I would have to say that in my time as a recruitment person, that I could see the decline happening, and that often, and I think I've talked about it before, particularly with graduate recruitment campaigns, where we would get literally thousands of applications for a handful of jobs. So I think the best ratio I had at one year, I got 1,106 applications for 10 positions. And really the differentiator was what else they had done, what else they could show me that they were doing in their lives that would develop skills that would be useful in the workplace. And even in 2016, when we talked about people getting qualifications, I acknowledge that the act of getting a qualification, of getting through university or extra study, does provide you with some skills that you don't automatically recognise, and certainly aren't listed as part of your qualification, the letter that goes after your name. So what we find now is that employers are asking, can this person apply what they've learned, or has it all been very theoretical? And that was, even when I went through my studies in the 70s, that was a question that was being brought to bear. Industry generally had a voice and was saying that this is what you're producing at university level is not what we need to employ. We want people who understand the business arena, the business workplace, and we need that to be incorporated into their learning for their technical qualifications, I guess you'd call it. And we see that in terms of trades as well, particularly here where there's been a change from you finish school at 16 or 17 and you go into a trade training environment, and in that there is a little bit of practical work as well as the theory work. And now we're seeing that even during high school, that young people can go to high school and have 2 or 3 days a week where they're in the workplace pursuing their chosen career in a business environment, in a work environment. So one of the other things that we look for as employers is that has this applicant demonstrated initiative beyond the actual study regime that they've got? So are they doing something else? And that's not just about having a part-time job or doing some volunteer work. It's about are they applying the thinking and the thinking process that they're learning in their study time to other areas of their activity. And also we're looking at, can they operate in real environments, not just in theoretical ones? And that, I think, has been the perennial question over time. So a degree tells us what someone knows, experience tells us what they can do. And I think that's the mantra that we use as recruiters now when we're looking at bringing people into an organisation. Increasingly, the second part, the experience, about telling us what they can do, is the priority for employment. So it always falls back to the degree is the baseline. What they can do, whether it's them expressing themselves about how they would apply what they've learned into my particular business environment, or whether they've had experience where they can show that this is what I did with what I learned, that becomes far more the deciding factor in recruitment, not so much the actual qualification itself. So what we have to address, though, is that experience gap problem. And we've talked about that again in the podcast a number of times. So the challenge is that graduates are being told you need experience to get a job, but at the same time you need a job to get experience. The gap between those has widened since 2016, and it's why we're seeing internships becoming more critical, project-based portfolios gaining importance, and alternative pathways like freelancing, contracting, or building something independently becoming more common. So it's this move towards being the solopreneur or the entrepreneur or the startup, so that they can apply the learning in an environment where they are still in control and then present that to the broader business community. So the modern graduate has to think differently. It's no longer finish the degree and get a job. It's build capability, demonstrate value, and earn opportunity. On the flip side of that, what have employers learned from this change in the way that we employ people? From an organisational perspective, thinking has also shifted. Back in 2016, we discussed the idea of recognising prior learning and experience rather than forcing everyone through the same qualification pathway. Now, that idea has certainly expanded. Today, many organisations are removing strict degree requirements for roles, valuing micro-credentials and short courses, and actively assessing real-world capability through tasks, simulations, or portfolios. Why? Why would they do that? Why would they spend time and effort in those sorts of activities when there's an easy, straight path of you've got the qualification, you've had this little bit of experience, you're in the job? Why are they doing it? Because they've learned the hard way that highly qualified does not always mean highly effective. And conversely, someone without formal qualifications can outperform expectations if they have the right capability. And I think in our positions, if we think about cross it back through all of our working lives, we can see that that has been the case. There's always been examples of that, where someone without formal qualifications has outperformed those that should be better at the job because they've got the right headspace, they've got the right capability, they're focused on the task and on the outcomes, because that's just the way that they have been working all of their working lives. Another major shift is the rise of non-traditional learning. So now we've got online platforms, industry certifications, skill-based training, and AI-supported learning environments. They're faster, more targeted, and more aligned to current industry needs. So the question then becomes, is a 3 or a 4-year degree always the best preparation for a rapidly changing job market? In some fields it still is, absolutely, and in others maybe not. So do we need qualifications? Yes or no? If we revisit that original question, are qualifications important? The answer is still yes, but it's with a critical update. Qualifications are now necessary in some cases, useful in many cases, insufficient on their own in almost all cases. And the real differentiator today is adaptability, applied skills, continuous learning, and the ability to demonstrate value quickly. So for those of you who are entering the workforce, don't rely on your qualifications alone. Build evidence of capability through projects and portfolios and real-world applications. And for those of you who have been around for a little bit longer, don't assume that qualifications still carry the same weight that they once did. Stay relevant, stay current. And lastly, for organisations, revisit how capability is assessed. If the focus remains only on formal qualifications, there is a risk of you missing exceptional talent if you're still assessing your applicants in the same way as you did even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Certainly, once you go past 10 years, you really need to be rethinking how you are assessing capability for particular tasks. So, qualifications, yes or no? Yes, but not in isolation. The world has moved from qualification-led to capability-led, and those who understand that shift, whether individuals or organisations, will be the ones who succeed. I'll leave it there for this week. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Inside Exec.